I have often come across this idea of an Eve gene. Um, and if you're not familiar with what the Eve gene is, the Eve gene is supposedly a gene that all modern day black women have that identifies them as the mothers of humanity, meaning that because they possess this gene, they have the ability to produce offspring that are representative of all of the modern races. I've always had two problems with that. One, race is not something that is biologically determined. There's no biological basis for race. So it would not be possible for a person to produce an offspring of a particular race because race is determined by society. Race is determined by us. We determine what a race is and we make it up and we change it all the time, period. The second thing that has always bothered me is if the Eve gene does exist, it resides on a chromosome. And as far as I know, based on all of the studies that I've read, I've never come across a paper or a study or a discovery that says we've identified the Eve gene and it resides on this chromosome. Those two things tell me that the Eve gene is something that's been made up. For whatever reason, people have decided to make it up. They made it up, but it's not a real thing. And anytime I've gotten into discussions with people about this concept, those two things that I raised right there have ended the concept point blank. They just doesn't go any further than that. But what I want to do tonight is I want to look at it from the perspective of people that say that this thing does exist. And I want to say, okay, the gene does exist. Now I want to examine or I want to engage in an exercise to see whether or not it would be possible for a mother to have offspring and pass on her genetic material, but only pass on genetic material to one offspring to the exclusion of all other offspring, and for that to happen for 250,000 years. Because remember, we're talking about the Eve gene is based on mitochondrial Eve, who is the mother of all of female humanity today, and she lived 250,000 years ago. So I want to see if that's possible. So that's why we're here today. Looking at mitochondrial Eve, the Eve gene, and the peopling of Earth. And basically, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to set the record straight about this idea of the Eve gene, and I'm going to do it using logic and evidence, and in the name of pursuing truth, in the name of just getting to the bottom of this thing, and putting it to rest once and for all. So the idea is that there is a such thing as an Eve gene. And since we really haven't identified on which chromosome the Eve gene resides, basically because it doesn't exist, I'm going to say that the Eve gene resides on chromosome 12, and that mitochondrial Eve passed chromosome 12 and the Eve gene down through the generations. Now, mitochondrial Eve, if she was a human female, had 46 chromosomes. 23 that she got from her mother, 23 that she got from her father. And since we're only talking about that DNA or that genetic material that's passed down from mother to mother to daughter to daughter to daughter to daughter, we can discount anything coming from men. Men don't pass down mitochondrial DNA. That's only passed down from mother to daughter, mother to daughter, mother to daughter, mother to daughter, virtually unchanged, virtually unchanged, with genetic mutations occurring. I think the data says on the average, once every 10,000 years or something like that, you'll get a major genetic mutation. It may be, don't quote me on that, but it doesn't happen often. So let's examine it from that point of view. Eve gene does exist. It exists on chromosome 12. And all we're looking at are the chromosomes that Eve passes on to her daughters. So Eve has 3 daughters, and each one of these daughters get chromosomes. Daughter 1 gets chromosomes 1 to 15. Daughter 2 gets chromosomes 8 to 20. Daughter 3 gets chromosomes 10 to 23. So as you can see here in this example, each one of the daughters received chromosome 12, meaning that each one of the daughters received the Eve gene. They all have it. They all have it. Period. They all inherited it. They all inherited it from their mother. Now, let's examine if it would be possible for Eve to pass down the gene from one daughter to one daughter, but not to the others. Sure, absolutely possible. But the chances of that surviving 200,000 years, 250,000 years, becomes greatly reduced because in order for genetic material to survive, it has to be spread to as many offspring as possible. So if she only gave the Eve gene to, let's say, daughter 2 and not daughters 1 and 2, not daughters 1 and 3, if daughter 2 died without having any children, that's the end of the Eve. That's the end of the Eve gene. It said there's no Eve gene. So in order for the Eve gene to survive, especially 250,000 years, it's got to be spread to as many people as possible. So in this example, we're saying that each of the daughters got the Eve gene from their mother. Now, each of the 3 daughters also had 3 daughters. So that's 9 grandchildren that Eve has. And as you can see in this example, each one of the granddaughters also have the Eve gene. So far, the Eve gene has been passed on to every person of succeeding generations without exception. But what you also see is right here, granddaughter 1, granddaughter 5, and granddaughter 8 have mutations on their chromosome 12 gene. And a lot of times when I'm talking to people about this Eve thing, they say, well, the reason why only black women have it is because way back then there were mutations, and those mutations led to white people and all the other people, and only the black women weren't affected by the mutation. Okay, fine. But the thing that they don't understand about mutations is mutations on a chromosome don't destroy the chromosome. Mutations are slight alterations to the chromosome. The chromosome is still there. All the genetic material is still there. It's just been altered slightly to the point that if you looked at the chromosomes from granddaughter 1 and compared them to the chromosomes of granddaughter 2, you would see a slight difference in their DNA makeup. Just maybe a 1% difference, if that much, not a whole lot. So even if there's a mutation, if they have the Eve gene is still there on the chromosome. It's still there. Now, for this exercise, um, each of Eve's daughters and granddaughters carry the Eve gene on chromosome C12. Granddaughters 1, 5, and 8 have mutations on C12. The mutations don't destroy the chromosome, they merely alter it. Over the course of millennia, many mutations will occur. Over thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, mutations are going to happen. All right, so now we don't have to look at the granddaughters that didn't have the mutation, because those granddaughters passed on the material without any problem. Those granddaughters passed on the stuff to their descendants. Let's look at the ones that just had the mutations, because that's a strong part of the argument for these people. So granddaughter 1, granddaughter 5, and granddaughter 8 each have mutations on chromosome 12, but they still carry the gene. Granddaughter 1 goes on to be the ancestor to modern white females. Granddaughter 5 goes on to become the ancestor to modern black females. And granddaughter 8 goes on to become the ancestor to modern Asian females. Now, each one of these granddaughters carry the Eve gene on a mutated chromosome, meaning that there is a slight alteration, but they're still passing this Eve gene down to their descendants. Now, the idea that for whatever reason, granddaughter 1 stopped passing it on to all of her descendants is just statistically impossible. And the same for granddaughter 8, that she stopped passing the gene on to her descendants, such that no Asian female today has the has the Eve gene, is just not possible. Then it also doesn't make sense, because why would granddaughter 5, the ancestor to all modern blacks, why would she alone pass on the gene to her descendants? And remember, they're not the only granddaughters. There are 6 other granddaughters that also have this gene, and they're having children, and they're populating the earth. And the only way that they didn't pass their genes on is if they died out. They died. And what are the chances of that? No. I mean, now we're getting into the absurd. So the idea of this is, okay, so either they didn't pass on the gene, either nobody passed on the gene to anybody and the gene doesn't exist, or each one of the descendants of Eve passed the genes on to some of their descendants and not some of the others, so that nowadays there are going to be some people running around with it and other people not running around with it, but it wouldn't be determined by race. Race wouldn't have anything to do with it. It would just be random. Um, or the other alternative is that all of the descendants pass the gene down to all of the other descendants, so that nowadays every female alive carries the Eve gene. Those are your only three. Those are your only 3 options. The other options are absolutely ridiculous. Or you can conclude that the Eve gene doesn't exist because it's just a bunch of bullshit, which is basically my conclusion. So there you have it. Each of Eve's granddaughters' descendants passed down the Eve gene to their descendants, who became the women who make up the modern day races. From this, we can see that the modern day black females cannot possibly be the only descendants of Eve who carry the Eve gene. It's just not genetically, hereditarily possible. It's just not. Period. End of the story. So we rise right back to the same conclusion from before, using logic. So these are the women of our planet. They're our mothers, they're our sisters, they're our wives. We care about them, we love them. Each of them are beautiful in their own right, and I think that's how we should look at them. They're beautiful. They keep the species alive. They keep us from dying out. And we should honor them for that, and we should respect them for that, and we should treat them with with reverence for that, because without them, that's it. There's no way that I could have had any of my children were it not for a female. Period. End of story. We can move on from that. The idea the idea that some of these females hold some sort of superiority over another female is just a perpetuation of racial division and societal division, and it's just bullshit, and we need to let go of that. We need to let go of that. We need to stop doing that. We need to we need to not endeavor to replace one historically false claim of superiority with another. We've got to stop doing that. This thing about the Eve gene is just stupid. It's dumb. It's ridiculous. And if it does exist, it just doesn't exist in one group of people. And if it does exist, it doesn't determine race because race has no biological basis. This has been proven scientifically. So no, shut the fuck up. It just doesn't, it's not the case. So thank you for allowing me to set the record straight. If you disagree with what I'm saying, please pass that information on to me so that I can review the data and we will go from there. So leave comments and I'll see you guys next week.